Salut YouTube! Welcome back to the Not Even French YouTube channel, which is your Francophile destination on the interwebs. I am so excited. New Zealand is starting to relax their border requirements, and it means we can start planning our trip back to France. Woohoo! I cannot wait. And I have been reflecting a little bit on who was Rosie when she first went to France and how much I have changed. And one of my subscribers actually asked me, what did French people think of you when you first arrived in France? Like when they were interacting with this fresh Kiwi girl from the other side of the world, what was going through their heads? And I thought that was a really interesting question. So I'm going to tackle that in today's video because French people, if you know anything about French people, they thought a lot of things. There would have been a lot of things going through their mind. They are analytical creatures, they are critical creatures, they are judgmental creatures at times. And so they absolutely would have been thinking things about me, good and bad. And so I've been thinking about some of those experiences and interactions that I had, and I will definitely share those in today's video, which I think will be a little bit of a laugh. But you know, I think one theme that you're definitely going to pick up on in this video is the naivety and just how fresh and green I was. And to be completely transparent, I moved to France for nails. I wasn't a Francophile before. I wasn't into the French culture or the French language. I honestly didn't know much at all. I knew that the Eiffel Tower was in Paris and the Arc de Triomphe, and I knew that they did wine and cheese and some surface level stuff, right? But I didn't know much about France whatsoever. And I really wish that I had put some time in to watch some documentaries, to watch some TV, to get a sense of the humor and the culture and even just the regional differences and the geographies and all of that kind of stuff. And I didn't even know back then that things like VPNs existed. You can actually watch local TV and all that kind of stuff. And speaking of, just before I get into today's video, I did want to let you know about my wonderful partners over at Nordvpn because they have an amazing VPN service. It's actually the fastest in the world, and it allows you to connect and watch local shows and TV. And this is such a great way to experience and connect with another culture, watching the news, watching their TV shows, watching their documentaries, watching the kids TV if you're learning the language. Like there's so many experiences you can have via their media. And how I use NordVPN now is I simply connect on my browser and I'm able to access the French version of Netflix and the main French TV sites and stream the news and stream reality TV and stream movies and documentaries. And it's so good for keeping connected to the language and to the culture as well, and just current events in general. So absolutely would recommend that. And NordVPN works really well because there are over 5,200 servers in 60 different countries. So there's never any lag. It's super speedy. You wouldn't even realize that you're not in your chosen country. And you can also share the VPN around several devices so the household can share it as well. And they're across all of the major platforms. So if you are curious or keen to take up the amazing offer that NordVPN is dishing out to you guys today, definitely check out my link. Just head to nordvpn.com/notevenfrench, or you can simply use my code notevenfrench at the checkout. You can sign up and get a 2-year plan with a massive discount. Plus, you even get a bonus gift. So let's get into some of the main points of the video and some of the things that French people were definitely thinking about me when I first arrived in France. Oh my gosh, just looking back at baby Rosie, I'm like, I just want to give her a hug. If only she had known what she was getting herself into. At the ripe age of 23, she moves to another country that she had never even visited before, following a French boy across the planet, and stays there for 6 freaking years. Oh my gosh. Honestly, I think the first impression, because I'm trying to think about who's the first French person who really saw me upon my arrival in France, and it would have been Niels's mum. And I think one of the first things that she would have thought is, this girl's tacky. Okay, this is very much an Anglo-Saxon culture and the New Zealand culture a little bit at the time. At least it was when I was in my early 20s. Preparing to go to France and see Niels again. So he was my boyfriend. I hadn't seen him for about 9 months. Like, I wanted to look good, right? And so like a couple of days before flying out, I got a nice light spray tan. It's very natural looking, to be fair. And I had my hair done. And I remember having it like after this 30-hour flight, right? I had it twisted up in like little buns so I could take them out and have nice waves in my hair. But I had traveled over basically in pajamas, like really comfortable clothes. But I flew from Auckland to Dubai and then Dubai to Paris. And then I got on a regional flight from Paris down to Marseille. And on that regional flight, I went into the bathroom of the plane and I got changed. I put makeup on, like a full face of makeup. I had my nails done. And then I put on this little white dress, this tiny little white mini dress, because I knew it was hot. It was summertime. It was cropped, not missing, but just connected with like almost these little daisies, like these little flowers that were on the dress. And so like my midriff was showing. And I walk out in like pump sandals, this little white mini dress, just looking like I was about to go out to a nice dinner or something, like some sort of occasion. You know, I think in the New Zealand mentality, especially for younger females, we're quite insecure. We don't seem to have this French level of confidence, like acceptance of ourselves and, you know, ease at wearing zero makeup and that kind of thing like French girls do. And so I think she was probably like, who is this bimbo? When I first saw Niels again, I obviously just like squeezed him and crumpled into his arms, but he was wearing this beautiful white linen shirt, you know, this tanned boy from the south of France in this white linen shirt. And I just like squeezed him and we were like crying and everything when I arrived. And I put foundation all over his shirt so that, oh my God, it was just so humiliating. When we got home, his mum looked at his shirt and she's like, what's that? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, that's my face. Oh my gosh, so bad. There's probably always a little bit of an element of like, you're just less classy than the French somehow. I think the other thing that French people thought about me straight away was like, oh, another English person. And what I found is that their chilly attitude would change very quickly, because obviously they could hear my accent when I tried to speak French at least. But their attitude did change when I said that I was a New Zealander. As soon as I said I was from New Zealand, they were like, oh, rugby man, haka, you know, and I was like, yeah. And most of them would say, oh, my dream to go to New Zealand. I'd love to go to New Zealand. It's just so far away and that kind of thing. So that really helped. But I think there's definitely a little bit of coldness towards English people. If you're English, let me know down below. But hopping into an Uber, that kind of thing, they could hear the English and my accent and they were sort of like very, you know, very whatever about me. And as soon as I said I was from New Zealand, that did change. There does seem to be a sort of fascination with New Zealand and France, and I would say that being a Kiwi made me instantly quite interesting to people. They were asking a lot of questions, and a lot of people dreaming of going to New Zealand or having spent like a year in New Zealand or something like that and saying it was just the best time of their life. I think another thing that people thought is that I was wildly brave as well. You know, I got that comment a lot, brave, courageux. I got that from Niels's dad, you know, you're so brave. Moving to the other side of the world with no sort of distinct time frame or backup plan and not knowing anyone except Niels, right? I think the French culture, they are more in touch with their roots and family, and they do travel a lot, but it's for specified times. It's like a lot of people do travel through the Erasmus system, so they know that they're going to be supported via their university system overseas for 6 months and then coming back. Or they do a gap year abroad. Again, it's part of their studies and they do come back, or they go overseas for that month in August or whatever that looks like. And so someone just sort of moving overseas with zero indication of when they'd ever go home again, I got the comments a lot that they thought that that was really brave. Not only that, but moving overseas and getting into a very prestigious master's program under La Sorbonne network, getting my apprentissage, my internship with LVMH, the Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy group. You know, I did get a lot of comments that that was super impressive. There are a lot of French people who strive to get into big groups like the LVMH group, and the fact that I had kind of winged it fallen into this incredible program and this incredible 18-month journey with LVMH and that kind of thing. A lot of French people did find me really impressive, I think, and especially not speaking French, they were like, how is she doing it? You know, how did that happen? And to be honest, I don't know. I literally applied to my program with no backup plan. I want that master's program, and that's the only one I applied for. I was working in HR. I knew how to pull together a really good application, of course, but still I took a massive gamble. And to be honest, I had to Google what LVMH was. I was like, I'd heard of Louis Vuitton, but I was like, and Moet and Chandon, okay, I've heard of that as well, but I was like, what is this place? I didn't even really know. So I think they were kind of impressed at how I was able to sort of make things fall into place, and then kept getting really cool jobs at tech startups, consulting firms, at L'Oreal, of course. And so that was obviously later on in the journey, but I do think there was a little bit of like, whoa, cool, she's nailing it. Speaking about the university, I'm sort of looking back to thinking, you know, what did they think about me? I was the very first New Zealander that had ever come to study in this specific program. So I think they were really happy to have me for their student brochure. They could count another nationality, right? But, you know, obviously it was an English speaking program, but there was a sort of element, I think, of a bit of skepticism about my experience. I'd been working in HR. I studied international human resource management over in Paris, and I'd been working in HR for a few years, and so I did know some stuff, right? I felt like my experience didn't really count or wasn't really seen as real experience for a couple of reasons. In the French system, anything you do before your master's degree must be an internship, right? I couldn't have possibly had a CDE, a permanent job, before getting my master's degree. So they're like, what? You started working full time and earned really good money before your master's degree? Wild, you know? So there was that, but also because it was New Zealand. They hadn't heard of any of our companies. I worked for New Zealand's largest company. It's a multinational. No one's ever heard of it, right? Over in Europe. They probably underestimated my experience a little bit and was sort of like, oh, you know, whatever. But as time went on in the program, I think they were more and more impressed because HR, human resources, has been a very administrative function in France because of the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the contracts and the complex employment law and that kind of thing. And so it's taken a very long time for that HR function to get strategic. Whereas in New Zealand, we're more innovative, agile, it's a younger country, right? And so we were working on these HR projects, which they were only sort of kicking off, you know, like agile HR, for example, when I left France, right? So in that way, New Zealand was actually quite far ahead. We move quickly. We're very, you know, we try things. It's a very entrepreneurial kind of mindset in that way. I remember them being quite surprised. Everything that I said was like, wow, so innovative. Whoa, so creative. Wow, that's so modern, you know? And it was just sort of my reality. So that was quite interesting as well. I do think when I first arrived as well, not speaking any French, people were like, okay, she's either really brave or really crazy. I think people would have thought I was very shy. I avoided speaking French for a long time. I was cripplingly insecure. I had zero confidence. I'd never learned a language before. I was learning one as an adult for the first time. And I really put the French up on a pedestal, you know, they're so much more cultured and cultivated, and they speak several languages. And I remember feeling very intimidated by European profiles for a long time because on paper, they had worked at the most incredible companies and they'd gone to several countries and they spoke several languages. And I just remember feeling very much lesser than, and I was so embarrassed to speak and to make a mistake. And that's obviously the worst thing you can think about yourself when you're trying to learn a language. So I think I would have come across as very quiet and very, very shy, especially for that first year in France. And they would have probably been quite worried for me, especially Niels's family, like, oh my gosh, is she ever gonna speak French? Because they don't really speak English. What really helped is that I really wanted to connect with Niels's grandparents in particular, and obviously his parents as well, who didn't speak French, and his wider family. And so that did help me get my ass into gear, and I would thrive more so in like quiet one-to-one conversations rather than at a big busy table. But yeah, they probably looked at Rosie and was like, oh my gosh, is she ever gonna speak? And I think that didn't help either in terms of making French friends up front, because there was kind of like this, oh, it's too hard. Like if I'm always gonna have to speak in English, too much work, right? Or, you know, will we ever be able to get deep, or will we ever be able to have an intimate conversation when she speaks like a 5-year-old, which is completely fair enough. Looking back as well, I'm sure that a lot of French people found me very ignorant and very naive. I hadn't heard of a lot of these people who are very famous in France. They asked me which famous French musicians I'd heard of. I could name like 2, you know? When they were speaking about specific sculptors or artists or these kinds of things, you know, within France and Europe, aside from the big names that everyone knows, I hadn't heard of them. And they were probably a bit surprised because in their world, having grown up in France and then also in Europe as well, you've heard of Italian sculptors and Spanish painters or musicians. And I just hadn't. You know, growing up in this insulated little bubble over in New Zealand, I wasn't really exposed to that, nor necessarily interested in that, to be completely honest. And I managed to bypass a whole chunk of that kind of knowledge within my education system. And so they probably did find me a little bit uneducated or sort of naive in that way, because I'd be really like, really? You've never heard of him? Il est très connu quand même. You know, like he's really famous. And I'd be like, sorry, I'm dumb. And in saying that is quite interesting because I went from being someone who was classed as quite smart. I remember, you know, all of my tests growing up when I was 5 years old, I was testing at the reading level, at the math level of 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. I was always advanced. And I actually took part in a few gifted children programs and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that to humble brag, but I'm saying that to, I'm relatively switched on. When I want to be good at something, I can seem to be good at something and learn something really quickly. But that didn't really seem to count or come through. And fair enough, because if I'm not speaking the language, how are you meant to get across that you're actually kind of smart and you know some stuff if you're not speaking the language and your general knowledge is failing? And so it's like, you know, I can solve some complex calculus for you if you want. Like, I'm really good at chemistry or like whatever that is. In that general conversation, I think it was very frustrating for me because I would have been coming across as a lot less smart than I was. And that was really hard. And also with the language level, you know, you can't be witty, you can't be funny because you're barely following the conversation for that first year, you know, when you go there speaking absolutely zero. So I think that was really, really difficult as well. And so I would have definitely been perceived as maybe just low IQ, I don't know. Looking back at my time at LVMH as well, I got the feedback that I was brilliant, I was smart, I was such a hard worker. I was one of the best interns that they'd ever had, which was really, really awesome. But on the other side, my manager literally described me as a quiet little mouse. And she said, you know, in France, that hard work and that tenacity, and, you know, I am very introverted and I was very shy and not speaking French, so that didn't help as well. But when you get to know me, I'm chatty, I crack jokes all the time, I've got a very dark sense of humor, but it was like I was never able to push past that initial shyness because of my lack of confidence around the language and that kind of thing. I mean, I did, but to a small insular group. And I remember her saying, like, in France, you've got to play the game. You've got to be networking. The upper managers need to know who you are. It's not enough that you're amazing at your job. You have to know the social codes. You have to get involved in the politics. And that was actually really good career advice that served me very, very much as I moved through the rest of my career in France, which moved really quickly and I got lots of promotions and it was really great. But I think, again, they would have sort of seen me as like, okay, hard worker, really smart, but it's not enough. And she needs to up her knowledge of those social codes and she needs to understand the politics in the room. And also, you know, I've mentioned this in my video about my embarrassing moments in France, but it goes back to maybe the tacky comment or maybe not having no class, but there's also like a whole heap of things you do and don't do in any society, right? And you just don't know those things. And I remember being in a beautiful chateau for one of our trainings at LVMH and they were serving beautiful platters with oysters and whatnot on them, and there was like, you know, saucisson cut up, which is cheap, whatever, it's like farmer's food, you know, like saucisson like cut up into slices, and out of the whole platter I'd be like, yum, saucisson, I love saucisson. It's like, don't say that, Rosie, you know. So there's there's also just moments of me being like, just, yeah, super fresh. I remember when I arrived as well, my new manager asked me which metro station I had gotten off at, and I said Champs-Élysées. I had never heard the word Champs-Élysées. I did, like, so I said Champs-Élysées, I think it was called. Like, things like that, I'm just like, oh, l'horreur. And I suppose the last opinion that I wanted to think about, what was I like when I first arrived in France, was Niels. And I think he was full of admiration for this adventure that I had taken myself on and to be with him and that kind of thing. But I probably came across as a little bit clingy up front. I very much clung to him until I made my own friend group. I'd follow him around. I'd ask him how to say things all the time. I'd sort of like use him as a bit of a translator between him and his family and that kind of stuff. So I was just always stuck by his side because I was so scared that to be left alone and just be in the room with like his dad and be like, so, le français, c'est compliqué. You know, like, I just didn't want to be stuck in that situation. And so I was like following him around everywhere like a lost little puppy. But anyway, I eventually grew in independence and the rest is history. And I had a really beautiful time in France, had an incredible career, amazing friendships. Can't wait to go back. It's going to be absolutely epic. And you'll be happy to know that my general knowledge has increased quite a lot thanks to all of the beautiful museums and exhibitions I was able to take part in, and honestly just traveling, you know, just being able to actually go to Greece, go to Italy, go to Spain. You learn a lot and you learn that you're curious because you actually get to be there, you actually get to touch it, right? So it's just a completely different world. So anyway, I would love to know what you thought about this video. Let me know down below if anything stood out to you, if anything made you laugh, if you have experienced moving to another country as well and just thinking back to that person you were and being like, oh gosh, how was I perceived by the locals? I would love to hear about it. You know, this culture stuff is absolutely my jam. It's what I love to talk about. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. So please let me know. and hey, there's always something to be said for ignorance. Ignorance is bliss, right? And I think if I had known how big of a life project this was and how difficult it would be at times and how much I had to learn, I would have been so intimidated before moving to France. Hey, maybe it's a good thing that I was a little bit naive because it allowed me to actually do the damn thing, and I'm just so much better for it. So voila voila. I will see you all next time on the Not Even French channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk soon. A bientôt!